Hello, American Crochet Association. Salena Baca here, founder, host, lead educator with the ACA. And on Tuesdays, I like to come here live and give you guys a new tip. Talk about something that will help better your crochet life. Today, I've got 5 tips to help anyone who loves crochet, help to make sure that not only do they have the knowledge and ability and skill to crochet anything that they want, but really whenever we're crocheting, we want all of those things that we're putting our time and effort and attention into to look professional, to look the best that they can. So to help you guys with that, I've got some tips today. I've got 5 tips to help you crocheters crochet like a pro. All right. If you're watching live, come on over, say hey, say hello, tell me where you're viewing from. And if you guys have any questions, comments, feedback about the tips today, let's make this a fun conversation. All right. As I'm going through the tips, which I've already put an outline in the video description. That way you guys can kind of see what's coming next. As we're going over each one of the tips, again, I really want to make this a conversation. So I'm going to ask questions. I can't wait to hear what you guys think. All right. Before I get started, let's see who's here. I see so many of you guys are watching. Lots of comments here. It looks like Amelia's here. Carol's here. Rosetta Williams is here. Cabrina, Margaret, Nignon. Pam is here. Hello, Pam. So good to see you. Rosetta, always so good to see you. Janet, Kathy, Hillary, Thompson is here watching. Margaret, she says, yay, I'm so glad I'm still awake. Happy Tuesday. Hillary Thompson, always so good to see your face. Loretta is here. Cabrina, hello, hello. Elaine is here. All right, guys, I'm going to start diving into it. Again, I've got 5 tips to help you guys crochet like a pro. Now, when I say that, I really am talking about, I want you to be thinking professional. I want you, and when I say that, I don't want you guys to be thinking, well, I don't want to sell my stuff. I don't want to have a crochet career. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that every single project that you make, you're making better decisions. And we'll talk about what that means, but you're making really good decisions about the things that you're making, about the materials that you're using. You're making better decisions about what kinds of things that you're making. You have a happier, more productive crochet life. And really, I hope these tips help so that every single stitch that you put together is going to give you a really fantastic crochet project. Okay, so 5 tips, here they are in order, or in no particular order, I should say. Tip number 1, again, I have it in the video description, is know your yarn. And when I say that, let me know what you guys think. Okay, let me know what your first reaction is to some of these tips. But know your yarn, a lot of you guys may say, well, of course I know my yarn. I crochet with yarn. I use yarn all the time. Of course I know my yarn. Just because you're familiar with yarn, just because you love yarn, just because you own yarn, may not necessarily mean that you really know your yarn. So most of these tips, all of these tips, have a personal story. So I'm going to share my personal story and really listen and tell me what you guys think. So I've been crocheting literally for, I guess this year it'll be like 34, 35 years. So I've been crocheting for a little while, but literally most of that time I used acrylic worsted weight 4 yarn, and that was it, right? Because that's what I had access to. That's what I learned with. That's what I was comfortable with. And I didn't expand outside of that because I learned how to make one thing. I learned how to make blankets. That was all I knew how to make, and I was using the same yarn that I always used to make blankets, okay? So it wasn't until I started seeing yarn more so in stores, I started kind of looking in yarn aisles, that I started seeing more yarns. And I would get really excited about color. I'd get really excited about texture. So I would see all these different and new and interesting yarns when all I'd ever used before, I'm not kidding you, I think the only yarns I had access to was like black, neon orange, maybe a few like very primary colors or like blacks and whites. So I really didn't have a lot, okay? So I'm looking at yarn in the store and I'm seeing colors and variegated yarn and different fibers. And I'm just buying whatever, like, it was all just like, I couldn't live without it, right? So there's all these different yarns, all these different colors, and I'm just kind of buying them up. And then I realized after doing that for some time that I was accumulating yarn that I really wasn't sure what to do with, because here I was buying all these little balls of cotton, but all I ever made was blankets. So I'm like, well, I can't make a blanket with these little skeins, these little balls of cotton yarn, because there isn't enough. And those are the kind of things that I like to make. So I found myself kind of in this pickle of, well, I only ever make blankets and I'm used to worsted weight 4 yarn, but now here I'm buying variegated yarn. I'm buying specialty yarn. I'm buying thick, thin, like this slub yarn, and I'm not sure what to do with it. I was excited about it, but I'm not sure what to do with it. So I've learned a lot since then, but I did accumulate a lot of yarn that way. And still to this day, I kind of get stuck buying yarn because it's new or it's pretty or it's different. And we'll come back to that in just a little bit. But when I say know your yarn, what I mean is really learn that there are different weight categories. So for example, in the commercial world, there are, for yarn, there's weights 0 to 7. Know that there is a difference between each one of those. Know that just because it's a weight 4 doesn't mean all weight 4s are going to be equal. There are subcategories, and some of those may be slightly different. Know that there are different fibers. That was something that took me a really long time to really learn and apply. So for example, I was only used to working with acrylic yarn. So I didn't really know what to do with wool. I didn't know why it cost more. I didn't know why I'd want to use alpaca. I didn't know why it would cost more. I didn't know why cotton came in smaller increments and why it costs more than acrylic. So really, there were a lot of unanswered questions that I had, and so I was stuck in this acrylic realm for a really long time just because I didn't know my weights. Sorry, I didn't know my fibers or my weights. And next were textures. I talked a lot about, these slub yarns, these thick, thin, and some had eyelash, like the eyelash yarn. I got really excited about all these different yarns because they were so pretty and they were so interesting and so different. But they weren't yarns that I was going to be using in the projects that I had. So really, I was just kind of accumulating yarn, and that was one hobby. And then crocheting, but not with the yarn that I was accumulating. So in knowing your yarn, you're going to ask better questions as you're looking at yarn. Not only that, but you're really going to be looking at the yarn label, and you're going to be seeing what is the fiber, how much do I get? What is the yardage in this? Is this going to work for the projects that I'm used to making? And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. So really, it's just kind of asking yourself those questions instead of getting really excited because a yarn is on sale, because a yarn is new, or because a yarn is pretty. And I know, and myself included, we constantly buy things based on that, and we accumulate our yarn based on that. But ultimately, understanding those different aspects are going to help us make better choices. So there it is. Tip number 1, know your yarn better, because knowing your yarn better is not only going to help you accumulate a better stash that's really going to pair with the things that you're making or the things that you want to make, but it's also going to help you to ask better questions about the yarn that you need to make the projects that you like. So I'd love to hear what you guys are saying. I've been chatting for some time. So let's see who's here and what you guys have to say. Oh my gosh, so many people are here saying hey and hello. I absolutely love it. I love it. Loretta is here. Loretta says, like a pro. Hello, Margaret. So good to see you. Hello, Linda Woodthorpe. So good to see you. Leanne is here. Valerie is here. Denise is here. Margaret, she says, I see you moved your office around. I did. So the lighting is not very good in my office. And so I'm still trying to move it around to see where I naturally get good light and you guys can actually see me. And so far, I don't really have that winning combination yet. So I may move around just a little bit more until, I can see during the day and you guys can see me. Maybe we'll figure it out. Amy is here. Debbie is here. Bev is here. Elaine, she says, I like variegated yarn a lot. And we're going to talk more about variegated yarn in just a minute. Gloria is here. Pam, she says, absolutely agree. I'm self-taught and love 4mm hook and DK cotton and making squares, but I've boxed myself in a bit with only sticking to those, so I'm training myself to experiment. We'll talk more about that in just a minute because I've got some more pro tips for you. We've only gone through one so far. Irma is here. Pam is here. She says, yeah, I have a lot of random yarn accumulating. Same. I still do that to a degree, not as much. I'm much more purposeful. I actually walked away from some new yarn today. I walked away from it. It was a little difficult, but I was like, not today, my friend. Maybe I'll come back for you. But I did apply some of the tips that I'm going to share with you guys today. And I walked away from that yarn. Deborah's here. Frances is here from New Jersey. Debbie, she says guilty. We're all guilty. We absolutely are. Tabby is here. Penny is here. Jody is here. Rena. Reg. Janetta is here from Alabama. Sarah's here. Kathy, she says, hi, good point about knowing your yarn. It really is absolutely crucial to have a better understanding of yarn, and really just knowing that there are a multitude of questions to ask about the yarn that you're going to use, about the yarn that you're adding to your stash, about the yarn that you want to use, or the yarn that you should use, I should say, to help you make the kind of projects that you want to make. So really, there's no wrong yarn to buy. I'm not telling you, don't buy weight 3 yarn, don't buy thread, because really to each their own. It really is all about making things that you like. So if you know what you like to make, then pairing that with yarns that are really going to highlight that project, that's what I mean when I say know your yarn, right? Okay. Hillary Thompson, I struggle with yarn choice on everything but amigurumi worsted is where I'm most comfortable. Penny, she says, hey, yes, I agree and try to buy only what I need, but once in a while I go for the sale. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, guys, so that was tip number 1. Okay, know your yarn. Let's dive into tip number 2. So I'm going to say a word, and I'm going to wait because I have so many people here watching. I really want to see what your knee-jerk reaction is when I say this, okay? Or tell me what you think when I say this, and even throw up some reactions. So some sad faces, some hearts, some anger, whatever it is. Okay, here's the word, gauge. What is your knee-jerk reaction in the crochet world when I say gauge? Some people have neutral feelings on this. Some people have really, gauge. Like, oh, don't get me depressed. Don't do it. All right, I see some thumbs up. I see some sad faces. All right, I don't see any comments yet. Maybe I scared you guys when I said gauge. All right, yeah, eye rolls, stuff like that. I hear you. Okay. But my second tip to help you crochet like a pro is understanding gauge and understanding tension, okay? So let's start there. Let's talk about gauge and tension, because I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about gauge and tension. I see angry faces there. Oh my gosh, you guys have all the feelings. I understand. Yep, angry and cursing and cover your mouth. Yeah, okay, so no happy, positive feelings when it comes to gauge is what I'm seeing. Yes, so I think that the misconceptions and the anger, it comes from not knowing. It comes from understanding what gauge is, understanding what tension is, but the frustration is that you're following a pattern, you're trying to make something, and your gauge isn't matching what the pattern is telling you, right? So sometimes, and I'm speaking, again, I've got all the stories, all the personal experience. When I crocheted in the beginning, I didn't fully understand that. I didn't fully understand that if my gauge and my tension did not match the pattern, I didn't know what I could do to help replicate what a pattern said. So for the longest time, my assumption was that I can't make clothes. I can't make a sweater. I can't make a baby sweater. I can't make, there were so many things to where if size was going to be crucial, even if it was a pillowcase, even if it was, You know, if I wanted to make a bedspread for a twin size bed, I was really just kind of winging it. So if I wanted it to be twin size, it might be bigger, it might be smaller. I'm really not sure. And there were so many projects I didn't even attempt. And there were so many projects that I tried, but then I give up on because I didn't understand that my stitch tension could be changed. That my stitch tension, the stitches that I was making, the rows that I was making, if it wasn't immediately matching the fabric that I needed to, that there were things that I could do to change that. So when I say understanding gauge and understanding tension, what I'm trying to say is that if you're following a pattern and you're like, oh, it just doesn't match, start with these things. First and foremost, if you want your thing to be exactly like the pattern, you're going to have to start with either the exact same yarn, or you're going to have to know your yarn so that you can substitute as best as possible. So for example, if you are looking at a really fancy crochet book or magazine and there's this gorgeous sweater on there that you're like, this is it, I'm going to make this sweater, I need to make this, it's beautiful, I'm doing it, okay? So you go and you buy the exact same yarn that the pattern calls for. And after kind of crocheting for a little bit, if you see that your tension, the rate in which you're making your stitches, how do they measure up, and the rows, how do they measure up? If it's not matching what the pattern says, don't give up. Know that maybe you can use a different hook size, slightly, you know, larger or slightly smaller, and kind of go from there, okay? Also, understand that your tension, it might not have to be an exact perfect match. Now, if you are making a sweater and it's a big duster or something like that, yeah, every little tiny measurement is only going to be maximized. So you don't want your duster to go to your ankles. You want it to maybe go to your knees, right? So gauge and tension is really going to matter on that scale. But know that you have the ability to make small alterations from the yarn to the hook size to how tightly or how loosely you're crocheting to whether or not, you know, all of those things are going to factor into you making the size that you're intending to make. So the more knowledge you have, the more you understand about what your tension is, what gauge is, and how you can meet it, you can make these small alterations, and then maybe you won't be afraid to make that sweater or that pillowcase or try something new that is size specific. Maybe you won't be afraid of that. Maybe you'll feel more confident and you'll give it a try. So what do you guys think about that? Margaret, your question, your comment is the first one that I see. She says, if the gauge on the pattern matches gauge, if the gauge on the pattern matches gauge on your yarn label with the hook size, is that the perfect yarn for the project? That's a little tricky, because when you're looking at gauge on a yarn label is telling you single crochet stitches by single crochet rows, and it's only giving you what matches a 4" by 4" square. So that is a particular gauge for a particular stitch. So that is going to be completely different than a pineapple stitch dress. It's going to be completely different than a double crochet hat. It's not using the exact same stitch. So gauge is always going to be a measurement of whatever's been made, whatever the thing is. The designer of that thing is measuring stitches within that pattern and rows within that pattern. So unless it's all single crochet, your yarn label is not going to give you that same information. So you could make something with a yarn, and you could make, let's just say, you know, swatches, for example. So I can take a yarn, let's just say Red Heart Super Saver worsted weight 4 yarn. I can make a swatch, a 10 stitches by 10 rows in single crochet, and that gauge is going to be 10 stitches by 10 rows equals 4" by 4" maybe. I could then take that same yarn and the same hook and make half double crochet stitches, 10 half double crochet stitches by 10 half double crochet rows. That might be 4.5 inches by 6 inches. I can take that same yarn, that same hook, make a double crochet, 10 stitches by 10 rows. That might be 4.5, 5 inches by 8 inches. So that's what I mean by gauge is the stitch. Gauge is a measurement of the stitch in the row specifically. So hopefully that helps. And that was a great question. I'm so glad that you asked that. Lynette, I'll never forget the one time I didn't bother with gauge, ripped it out. She says, then in order to get gauge, I had to go down 3 sizes on my hook. So every designer's gauge tension is not the same. Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you said that, because that's another misconception about gauge and tension. There is no one universal gauge and tension. There really isn't. Because however I crochet, again, Penny, if you and I were given the exact same yarn and the exact same hook, and if we both made a little swatch right here, if we both made the exact same thing, let's just say 10 double crochet stitches by 10 double crochet rows, ours may not measure exactly the same. And let's just say we're not, but let's just say that was a pattern that we were both publishing, right? So my pattern would say 10 half double crochet stitches by 10 half double crochet rows is 4.5 inches by 8 inches. Well, Penny, your pattern might be 4 inches by 7 inches. So Penny's tension is not the same as my tension. Therefore, our finished projects are going to measure differently. But if Penny's pattern was written with her tension, that will be her gauge. If my pattern was written with my tension, that will be my gauge. If I was copying her, if I was following her instructions and working her pattern, I would have to make adjustments, and the same, she would have to do the same for mine. So gauge really is a measurement of whomever made the fabric, and that's where it comes from. So hopefully that makes sense. Margaret says, right, okay, that makes sense. Let's see. Penny, yes, good point. As all crocheters knit at a different tension, so always better to have extra yarn, maybe. Let's see. What other comments are here? All right, I don't see. Penny, try to get it close because it does make a difference on clothing dolls. Some projects I will wing it and get something new. Yes, absolutely. What I was saying about the, the duster sweater thing was try to get as close as match as possible, because there's going to be a huge difference between a size medium and a size large. For example, there's going to be a huge difference if you're trying to make a 6-inch amigurumi doll. You want it to be 6 inches. You don't want it to be 10 inches. So yes, your tension is going to affect size. And so really you want to assure that you are gauging your stitches and rows as close as possible to a pattern. All right, guys, I'm going to move on because I have 5 tips and I've only gone through 2. If you are here watching live, come on over, say hey, say hello, tell me where you're viewing from, and feel free to make this a conversation. So as I'm going through these tips, ask questions, leave feedback, make sure you're commenting because it just makes it so much more fun that way, okay? All right, guys, so tip number 3. Here's another one of those trigger words in crochet, and I don't want anyone to cry. I know that you're going to feel enraged as soon as I say this, but I'm here to teach. I'm here to make these terms less negative, I should say, okay? So tip number 3, be sure to swatch. Not for everything, but I'm here to say that I want you to understand what a swatch is and how it can help you. Now, I know that there's a lot of negative feelings with gauge and size and swatching, particularly swatching. And now let me try and think of, let me name off all of the misconceptions or all the reasons that we don't want to swatch. It's a waste of yarn. It's a waste of time. You just want to make the thing anyway. You don't want to have to worry about what size it is. You don't make things that need to be swatched for gauge and size, right? Am I close? Am I close? Am I speaking anyone's truth right now? I understand. And for the longest time, I thought the same thing. I thought, a swatch is just a waste of time. I'm already crocheting. I don't want to waste my time by making this swatch, right? By swatching. And a lot of times crocheters feel like creating a swatch is only to, try to match gauge, to try to see what your stitch tension is, to see if your gauge is matching the pattern gauge pertaining to size. So that's why so many crocheters just kind of overlook the swatch. They skip the swatch because they're like, well, I'm not going to be crocheting anything that needs to be sized, so it doesn't matter. I'm using yarn that I like. I'm using what I want, so I don't need to do that. But there's so many reasons you might want to create a swatch. And so let me just share with you some things that are really going to help you crochet more so like an expert. Now, one of my favorite reasons to swatch is whenever there's a brand new yarn. So there's a brand new yarn, it's in the store, it's beautiful, it's plush, it's gorgeous, it feels like a kitten, it's amazing, it's fantastic, everyone's using it. And it might be your new favorite yarn ever, I don't know. But before you buy 10 skeins, before you buy 10 skeins to make your sweater or to make a blanket or whatever, what I encourage you to do is maybe just buy one skein, right? And then bring it home and then just make a swatch, okay? And this is what I want you to do. I don't want you to create anything intricate or crazy or anything like that, but just play with the yarn. I talk a lot about, just do 10 rows of double crochet by 10 rows of double crochet, right? I talk a lot about that because that's really going to be very telling about the yarn, but a lot more than that, okay? So, whenever you're crocheting with yarn, you're like, oh, I love this yarn, and you start crocheting with your, like, it's sticky, or it's stiff, or it splits. You can tell that immediately. You can tell that within 5 minutes, how much you either like a yarn or you don't like a yarn. And there are a lot of yarns that I've gotten, and I'm like, yes, I'm gonna make my new summer top. It's gonna be gorgeous, and I'm using this yarn, and I'm buying 10 skeins of it, and I get the yarn, and I'm like, it's a lot thinner than I thought it would be. It's really heavy. It doesn't have a nice drape. You can tell all of those things just by making a little swatch of double crochet stitches. So that's going to tell you whether or not you like working with the yarn, how much you like working with the yarn, but it's also going to tell you quite a few more things. How does the fabric feel? Yes, you are just working with one stitch. Maybe you try a completely different stitch stitch variation. Maybe you make a granny square, maybe you use single crochet stitches. So there's lots of different stitches that you can try to see what the fabric feels like, right? Because that's going to tell you a lot about a yarn. Ooh, this makes a nice thick fabric. This could make a great tote bag, or this is a nice drapey fabric. This would make a nice summer top or shawl. So really we can already kind of determine, based on the fabric that we're making, what it's capable of. And a few more things that a swatch can do. I'd love to hear what you guys think. But a few more things a swatch can do is it can tell you about the color. So I will tell you for my own self-experience, because when I first started crocheting, like for years and years and years, I only had solid yarn. So when I started yarn shopping in person, I started seeing like variegated yarns with all of these different colors, right? And I'm like, yes, I love these colors. Oh my gosh, they're so beautiful. And I would get variegated yarn with these really short repeats of like all these colors. And then I started crocheting with them and I realized all this color is really, I don't like the way the color's pooling. I don't like the way the color just hides the stitches. I don't like the way the color hides the fabric. Like for the kinds of things that I want to make, all of these colors are just not working. So I found that I don't like tons of color in my yarn. I love it in the unit. Whenever I see a skein of yarn or a cake of yarn or a hank of yarn, I stopped buying the ones with tons of color. So now whenever I look at color, I think about it differently because I've swatched so many different times thinking about color that now I'm able to make better choices. I know my yarn better. So one more thing that I absolutely love to do whenever I create a swatch is, again, go back to, I want to make a blanket, it needs 12 skeins of yarn. I want to make a sweater. I want to insert whatever it is that you want to make. And maybe it's even a tote bag and it only needs 2 skeins of yarn. Maybe you want to ask questions about, how do I care for this? Am I using the right hook size? Because is the hook size, it's one thing whenever you're crocheting, your fabric has not been used yet, right? So sometimes it's a little hard to tell how something's going to pan out whenever you're crocheting it. Sometimes you really want to feel it in use. You want to see it in use. You want to see what kind of care instructions your yarn needs. So create a little swatch and then follow the yarn label. And what I want you to do is go through the care instructions. So if you're thinking about making an Afghan for someone and you want it to last forever and you want to make sure that the yarn or the color that you're using and the hook that you're using, you don't want to make an Afghan and it go in the washer and the dryer because you're thinking it's acrylic, it's fine. And then it grows like 4 feet and then it's huge and loopy. You don't want that. So you want to make a little swatch, go through the care instructions, because maybe you determine, oh, I'm not going to put it in the washing machine, or I should have put it on cold, or I should have used fabric softener, or maybe I shouldn't have put it in the dryer. It's going to help you to determine what that yarn looks like, what that fabric looks like once it goes through those care instructions. And then you can determine on a really small scale what kind of revisions you should make, what alterations you should make, so that you don't have to test that out on your finished project. So those are all the reasons to swatch, and we barely talked about size, although size is one of them, but really there's so many other reasons. So I would love to hear what you guys think about swatches. Margaret, she says, if the gauge on the pad, oh, we already read that one. That was a great question, by the way. Lynette, I read that question. Kelly is here. Penny, she says, yes, good point, as all crocheters knit in a different tension, or crochet, she says, or she corrected herself. Hello, Rebecca. Good to see you. Debbie is here. She says, totally agree. The thing that I find with myself is when starting a project, I tend to begin the foundation rows looser than the remaining rows. Another great reason to swatch, and I didn't say this because I really have 10 different reasons that I create a swatch, is to practice. So before you go and make a brand new pattern, typically whenever I start a new pattern, and it doesn't matter how long I've been crocheting, it doesn't matter how seasoned I think I am. If I'm working something new, I'm really paying attention to what the words are telling me. So I am not quite sure what I'm making yet. So I'm following the instructions and I'm making something. And so my tension may be off. Maybe my stitches are a little uneven. Maybe my first few rows or rounds are not going to be as perfect. So once I get into the groove, everything's going to look far more uniform because now I know what I'm doing. So another great reason to swatch is to really practice whatever new thing you're going to do, whatever new stitch, new technique, whatever that new thing is. Practice a little bit, and that way your foundation row is not going to be really tight and bunchy, and it's not going to be really loose and loopy. So that was another great example. All right, Debbie, totally swatch, especially if it's a complex pattern. Yes. Margaret, I will make a gauge sample, but not a swatch. A sample is the same thing as a swatch. So a swatch is essentially just a small sample of work, whether you're measuring it, whether you're washing it, whether you're practicing. A small sample of work is a swatch. So if you're doing that, you are swatching. Lynette, what is the difference between checking gauge and creating a swatch? It's what you do with it. So a swatch is the thing. It's the thing that you make. It could be a tiny granny square. It could be a circle. It could be a swatch is just a tiny sample of work. It means I'm not really making a project. I'm just making something tiny on a small scale. So gauge is you measuring stitches per inch and rows per inch. So gauge means now I'm going to take this swatch and I'm going to measure it because maybe I do want to check my tension, or maybe I do want to measure how this is coming out. Jen is here. Eliza's here. Penny, she says, yeah, I don't usually make swatches unless it's a new yarn or stitch. I do check the gauge as I go. Lucinda's here. Kathy, she says, I have never swatched. I'm self-taught, so this is good information. Good. I'm so glad. Margaret, she says, but it's hard just to buy one skein of yarn just for a swatch test when that yarn is on offer or on sale. She says, but the more I think about it, I might start doing it for some projects. I think it's a good way for you to make better decisions about the kind of yarn that you're bringing into your life. And you can do whatever you'd like to with this information. If yarn is on sale and you're like, it's $1 a skein, it's 90% off, I'm just going to buy it. Absolutely, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you feel that, the reason I'm giving these tips is if you feel that your crochet life could be better, if you feel that the yarn you're using just isn't fitting with the projects that you're making, if you feel that the yarn that you're buying, it's not your favorite, if you're tired of buying yarn or adding yarn and it's just not right, all of these things will help you to make better decisions. And those better decisions are going to help you make better projects and then you're going to feel more like an expert. Every single stitch that you work is going to be with more care and consideration and expertise. Every yarn that you use for those projects are going to help elevate the status of that project as well. So I'm not saying stop buying yarn, only buy one skein of yarn and test that. I mean, these aren't hard and fast rules, but they are suggestions to help you really just get more information about the tools and the resources that you have. Okay, guys, so that is 3 tips so far. Tip number 4 in my 5 tips to help you guys crochet like an expert is, and I'd love to hear what you guys think. You guys may be really excited about this one. Only make what you love. That seems simple, right? That seems simple, but let's think about this a little differently, okay? Because I know that we're saying, well, of course I only make what I love, but there's a few things that we do to ourselves as crocheters that kind of punishes us, right? So we started crocheting because it's our hobby. It's something that we love. It's something that we want to get good at. It's something that we want to do more of. And maybe especially in the beginning, you're crocheting and you're still kind of wondering, well, I don't really know what my niche is. I don't really know what I'm good at. I want to crochet everything. Or maybe you get into crochet because, you know, oh, I really want to make baby blankets, or I really want to make amigurumi, or I really want to make fill in the blank, right? But maybe you start making that thing and, you know, you're careful about your yarn, you're careful about your gauge, maybe you make a swatch, but maybe you're making this thing and you're like, I just don't, you know, I thought I wanted to make amigurumi, but I really don't. I don't enjoy the 47 different pieces that I have to put together. It's too much pressure. I really thought I wanted to make a pocket shawl because they're all the rage right now, and my friend knows I crochet and she wants me to make her one, and I thought I was all excited, but now I'm making it and I just don't like making things like this. Or my friend is having a baby and she asked me to make a baby blanket, and I just don't like making these things. So sometimes we get kind of roped into projects, right? And we start making something, and for some reason it now goes to the never-ending, always growing whip pile. Do you guys have these? The whip pile? To where it's the half-finished sweater, it's the blanket that you started, it's the pocket shawl for your friend, it's the one baby booty. It's this pile of projects that aren't finished. So I learned this the hard way because I had a never-ending pile of whips. And when I started looking through them and I started feeling guilty about all these whips, I realized that there were things about each one of them that made me just not love that project. So I decided I'm not going to force myself to finish these projects. And as a matter of fact, now I do ask myself better questions about yarn, understanding gauge, making a swatch. But now I kind of have really dialed down what I enjoy making and what I don't enjoy making. 10 years ago, I would have crocheted anything for anyone that they asked just because I wanted to learn. I wanted to grow my experience. I really wanted to crochet different things. It was fun for me to figure those out. And now if you were to ask me to make your baby an outfit, I would say, no, thank you. That is not my thing. I don't enjoy it. I don't want to. And my never-ending whip pile now, it's significantly smaller because now when I start a project, if I'm not excited about it, I'm not excited about it because maybe the yarn, maybe the color, maybe I'm starting this project and I don't really like the stitch. I don't like the fabric it's making. So if I'm not totally excited about a project, I'll put it off to the side for a little bit, but I'll come back to it within a couple weeks or a month. And if I really don't feel like picking it up, I will frog that project. I frog it. I will take out all that yarn and I will repurpose it. So when I say only make what you love, remind yourself that there are questions you can ask. Like, why don't I like this project? I don't really like how complicated the pattern is. I don't like that it's really hard to meet the gauge on this pattern and that doesn't really spark joy, or whatever you want to call it. I don't like the yarn. I don't like the color. I don't like the way the color's pooling. I thought I'd really like this blanket, but it turns out I don't really want to make 97 squares and sew them together. So it was fun to make 2 and I learned a lot, but I also learned that I'm not making this blanket. So if you focus on making things that you love and not feeling guilty about not finishing things or not following through with things, that's okay. You don't have to force yourself to crochet things, because as a matter of fact, if you do that, then you might just crochet less and less and feel like you're just not capable of crocheting, or you're just not good enough to crochet some things. You could be perfectly capable. You might really be able to crochet that baby outfit for your friend, but being capable and wanting to are two completely different things. So am I capable of making that baby outfit for my friend? Yes. Do I want to? Nope. And you know what? That wins. And that's okay. Hillary Thompson, variegated yarn is not for me. Everything I make looks muddy. I always have to pair it with a solid color. Brooke, love working with cakes in a round. The colors work great and pop. Yes, that's good information. Debbie, I swatch with yarn I have on hand to determine if I like doing the stitch pattern from the swatch results. Yes, that is an excellent, excellent thing to do. Cabrina's here watching. Margaret Swan says, if I had to make a swatch first, I would have seen that I should have used a larger hook. Swatching next time for sure. And you're just, it's okay to learn something. As a matter of fact, that's why we swatch, to learn something. And maybe all you're doing is just practicing, kind of getting ready, right? Maybe all you're doing is warming up, and that way the thing that you make is going to be really just, every stitch is going to be as perfect as possible. Heather is here. Brooke is here. She says, variegations, meh. She says, but long cakes in the round are awesome. Pam, she says, I lack patience. Always just want to dive into reading through pattern with no swatch. You might find, if you ever feel, now if you're comfortable with that and whatever you're making, you're happy with and you're excited and you don't have a never-ending whip pile, absolutely, you go right on ahead. But if you ever feel like, oh, I used the wrong yarn, I used the wrong color, if you ever feel dissatisfied once you're working through a project or once you're finished with a project, if you feel like, I should have done something different, I wish I used a smaller hook, I wish I used a different color, I wish I used a different yarn, that's why swatching can be brought into your crochet life to help make better decisions. And that way, you know that you're making this little swatch. You know that you're taking 30 minutes to kind of invest time. But whatever project you make, you're going to make it with far better decisions. So the more projects that you make, the more swatches that you make, the more questions you ask about yarn, you're going to have less items in your whip pile. You're going to have less yarn in your stash that you're like, that was not really a good choice. You're going to have less projects to where you feel like, I wish I would have done something different. Hillary Thompson, if there's a stitch that I'm unfamiliar with, I'll swatch it out to be sure it looks good. Yes. Pam, which is why my 10-year-old daughter wears the only crochet sweater I ever made for myself. Penny, yes, swatching will help for swatching will help for gauging cables too, ? Like how much yarn pulls in. Yeah, anytime you're trying a new stitch or a new technique, it's an excellent idea to try that out on a swatch first. Another great example is, I don't like big cables. I don't like big crochet cables. At first I thought, oh, they're beautiful and I love them and I want to make all the things with cables. And then I made something with cables and I decided, well, let me try this big cable, right? Like this 8-stitch cable. And I was like, I just don't like, this is just not fun for me. But then I tried a little 6-stitch cable and I was like, yeah, okay, I like the stitch. I like the 6 and 4-stitch cables, but I don't like the 8-stitch cables. So yes, just doing that practice is really going to help you make better decisions. Hello, Linda from Michigan. Kathy, which stitch do you use to swatch with? Any. So if you're following a pattern, then, and it depends on why you're creating a swatch. If you're creating a swatch because you want to test your stitch gauge and your row gauge, if you need something to be sized specifically, then you're going to swatch whatever the pattern fabric is, whatever the pattern stitch is. But if you just want to try yarn, if you just want to, see how a yarn works up in the color and everything, you can use any stitch. You can do whatever you like. So it really depends on what you're doing. Let's see. Margaret, very true. I took an order for tapestry crochet and I hate tapestry crochet. That's what I mean. That's exactly what I mean. Only make what you love. All right, guys, I've got one more tip for you guys. I've got 5 tips that I'm going over today. I've already gone over 4 of them. 5 tips to help you guys crochet like an expert. And my last tip that I have for you guys today is kind of a culmination. It's a combination of some other things that I said to you guys today. But really, it's just as important. And whenever you are applying all of these tips, this is one that you constantly apply. And that is practice makes perfect. And some of you guys may argue with the whole practice makes perfect. Like, it's never going to be perfect. And practice is going to always make you be better than you were before. And if that's what you're trying to do, right? You always want to better your craft. You always want to feel more knowledgeable, more confident, more skilled. Then that's why you're going to continue to practice. So when I say continue to practice, I mean things like make sure that you're swatching. Make sure that you're swatching just for the fun of it, just to try new techniques. I constantly make, I constantly make swatches because I want to see if a yarn is going to look good in the round, if a yarn color is going to look good in a round. Should I make joined rounds or should I make continuous rounds? Is this color going to look good with a double crochet or half double crochet stitch? And of course I write patterns. So, those are the kind of questions that I ask, and those are some things that I do. But some other things that I do to really practice are with new stitches, new techniques. Again, you can be an expert crocheter, which means you can do anything, but just because you understand the concept of making an 8-stitch cable, it doesn't mean that you attempting the 8-stitch cable is going to look absolutely perfect. You're going to maybe fumble, your tension may be a little off, maybe you're a little slower. So before you go and make that sweater with an 8-stitch cable, because you're a more experienced level crocheter, because you're aiming to be a more experienced level crocheter, you're going to take time to make a little swatch of that 8-stitch double crochet cable to go, do I like making this? Okay, let me try and get better at this. Okay, my first row was terrible. It was really tight. My second row was really loose. But after, rows 6, 7, 8, I've really gotten the hang of this. Maybe I'm not using the right yarn. Maybe I'm not using the right hook. Maybe I just don't like this. The more you practice, and practicing all these concepts, practicing knowing your yarn, asking questions about your yarn, understanding your yarn, understanding gauge, not only your own personal tension, but what gauge means whenever you're following a pattern, when size matters, when size doesn't matter, swatching and really incorporating swatching into your crochet life. And, that's kind of where that practice comes in. Sometimes, for example, I get a new yarn and I'm like, should I weave in these ends or sew in these ends? Before I make the thing, let me make 2 tiny swatches and see if I should weave them together or sew them together. Let me practice that first on this swatch. And then, because this is going to be a thing that's potentially going to go in the washer or dryer, let me weave in an end and sew in an end, throw these things in the washer and dryer and see which one really is going to last. So there's so many different things to practice. And just because you've crocheted 1,000 things doesn't mean you know everything. It doesn't mean you're ever going to be, I'm an expert, I've learned everything, there's nothing more to practice. Becoming an expert in crochet means that you're continuously practicing. It means that you are a perpetual student. You're a perpetual learner. And because you're always learning, you're always going to learn more. And every single time you learn something different, every single time you apply something different, your skill and knowledge and ability is only going to grow. So those are my 5 tips. I'd love to see who else is here and what you guys are saying. Pam, absolutely practice. I wrote that on Monday. People ask me how to crochet like I do, and I say you can. It's just desire and practice, and always be learning. Yes. So it's not that, okay, I crocheted an experienced level pattern, now I'm a crochet expert. If you want to get that expert status, if you want to get that pro status, if you want your projects to look professional, right? As perfect as possible, it's all of these things put together. And it's literally leading this lifestyle of being a crochet learner, a crochet student. So absolutely, that's great advice. I'm so glad you said that. Brooke, this is the reason I do crochet alongs now and again. That's a great thing. Margaret, if my gauge doesn't come out, did you say I should change my yarn? That's one thing that you can do. So you always want to, so you can go back and watch from the beginning on my tips for that. But you know, yes, yarn is one thing that that affects size. Your hook is one thing that affects size. How tightly or loosely you crochet is another thing that affects size. So yes, those are all things that you can, those are all things that attribute to size. Sharon Osborne is here. I discovered some great reasons to swatch from the American Crochet Association. Now I do it when starting a new wearable. I'm so glad. Thank you so much for sharing, Sharon. Penny, good point on the ends. That always is a worry, wanting to make sure it doesn't come out in the wash. So yeah, so just because maybe you feel like, yeah, you always just sew in your ends no matter what. Well, if you're always using the same yarn, then yeah, that's something you test a few times. But if you're changing yarn, if you're using different yarns, if you're applying it to a different kind of project, that's something you want to practice and test out. Absolutely. Kathy, she says, love all this information. My pleasure. Hillary Thompson, I'm always striving to be a better crocheter and pattern writer. Linda, I cannot read, so I watch videos and I learn so much. So please keep doing videos. Thank you so much. Linda, if you'd like to learn how to read crochet patterns, we do have a course that teaches you. And that way you can still watch crochet videos, but you're not going to, that's not going to be the only thing, right? So if you want to learn how to read crochet patterns and crochet charts, come on over and join the learning path at the American Crochet Association, because we definitely have some really good courses on that. Margaret, I do sell my items, so this kind of class is extremely helpful. So glad. And the last comment that I see is from Debbie. She says, I'm in awe of you all pattern writers. Thank you. It is a labor of love, and it is a lot of practice, and it's a lot of math, and it's a lot of trial and error. But I think it's a lot of fun. All right, guys, that's all I have for you guys today on this Tip Tuesday. I hope you enjoyed these 5 tips to help you guys crochet like a professional, so that every single thing that you make is done with knowledge and skill and ability. And hopefully applying all of these tips will help you to not only have a happier, more productive crochet life, but hopefully you can really see that reflection in every single project that you make. If you guys enjoyed these tips, let me know in the comments. I would really love to hear your feedback. If you guys thought these were great tips and you'd like to share them with a crochet friend, you can tag them here in the comments. Or if you could just hit that share button and share this video in just one place where you enjoy crochet, I'd really appreciate it. All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here with the American Crochet Association. It is a joy and a privilege to share your crochet time with you. Peace, love, crochet. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.